Hi guys, it's Janae and welcome back to my channel. Also, if you're new here, I post new videos every week. So today is my fourth video in my Harry Potter series, and if you want to check out the previous three, I'll leave the playlist here for you to take a look. And for today's video, I'm actually going to be taking a look at what a TV series based around the founders of Hogwarts' lives and journey could potentially look like. Now, of course, by no means am I implying that there absolutely has to be any more Harry Potter related spin-offs or add-ons to the universe, but I did think it would make an interesting topic of discussion. Now, I just want to say that I did try and do as much research as I could, but inevitably I did have to take some liberties, otherwise there would have been very little to work with. But that being said, I will be leaving all the links to the information that I found in the description box below if you want to check it out. So on to the information on this hypothetical series. In terms of the format, I took a look at the three arcs that I thought could possibly take place within the series, and using that I kind of determined that the best format for this might be a 7-episode long series consisting of 3 seasons. Now, in terms of the arcs that I mentioned, those are basically just the 3 major things that I could find that happened in the founders' lives and the journey behind each of those things. So the 3 arcs that I see taking place within the series is firstly the meeting of the 4 founders and the journey that led them to deciding to start a school. Second would be the building, managing and thriving of the school, and third would be the progression of problems between Salazar and the other founders. All these events take place over several years, which is why I think it would be a good idea to have them separated into 3 seasons, as the time between seasons could easily give the illusion of time passing, if handled correctly. In terms of the style of the series, I would recommend a similar style to the 2005 BBC show Merlin, and not just because I'm a massive fan, but because I think that Merlin was at times quite dark, but still had a definite lightness to it, which makes it a style that can be more appealing to a wider age range, instead of just adults and older teens like would be the case for a Game of Thrones style series. Now I'll be moving on to the actual plot of the first season in an episodic format. Okay, so somewhere in my research I came across the fact that Godric and Salazar actually became friends before they befriended Helga and Rowena. So I think in terms of this, it would be wise to introduce the 4 founders over the course of the first 3 episodes, instead of cramming all of it into the first episode and possibly having that "oh, what a coincidence" syndrome stem from that. So I think in terms of the first episode, it would do well to show Godric Gryffindor leaving his home in order to better explore the wide world of Britain. In the history of the founders, it's made quite clear that Godric was known for his impressive dueling skills, so I could easily imagine him going around to wizarding dueling tournaments to both try and raise money for himself and to broaden his own knowledge. So I could easily imagine Godric and Salazar meeting in the dueling ring, but finding out that they get along quite well outside of it. So Salazar, with his cunning, tells Godric that he's noticed that the host of the tournament is playing dirty with the way he manages the tournament. The 2 of them decide to team up to take down the host while also securing the winnings for themselves. For me, it wouldn't be hard to believe that they would bond over their thirst for magical knowledge and the need to be the best in their chosen area of magic. So I could easily imagine them then teaming up to travel together as they venture to broaden said magical knowledge. I think in terms of episode 2, it should start off with Salazar and Godric handling some bandits in the woods before they hear news of a creature terrorizing a nearby Muggle village. So both wizards, wanting a challenge and wanting to help the village, venture towards said village and try and defeat the creature. But unfortunately they fail and soon come into contact with Helga, who happens to live in said village. And then, noting Helga's affinity for charms, they team up together and find a charm that will temporarily drive off the creature. but unfortunately they need a more permanent solution. They need a charm that will last even when they leave the village. Then, right before the episode ends, it would show Rowena showing up at the village that the other three are already at. So at this point, I think it might be worth mentioning that I'm working under the assumption that because the founders lived around the time of the 10th century, the magic, though it might have not been widely accepted, would probably not have been in hiding. So the third episode would start off with Rowena searching for Godric and Salazar. Meanwhile, Godric, Salazar and Helga are still trying to figure out a way to strengthen the charm and make it permanent. Rowena finally finds Salazar and Godric, and she explains that she wants to join their travel party as she's heard of their acts of chivalry, and because she is from a town that hates magic wielders, she thought that since they have the same values and seem to be after the same things, they would be the perfect fit for each other. Salazar and Godric are reluctant as they never truly intended to have a travel party, but Rowena makes a deal with them, saying that if she manages to find a permanent solution to the creature problem, then they need to allow her to journey with them. Godric and Salazar continue to refuse as they're still not sure if they can trust Rowena, but when the creature attacks again and the four of them are unable to keep the villagers safe, they concede to Rowena's help. The episode ends with the three of them agreeing to work together to find a solution for the creature. The attacks from the creature continue to grow more intense, and other creatures from the nearby woods start to become riled up in the process. Rowena suggests that there might be something in the forest causing the creatures to act up the way they are, so Godric and Salazar venture into the forest to try and figure out what's going on. During their search, they find a nomadic group who seem quite strange and suspicious, but there is nothing that they can truly point to as being the cause for the suspicion. They continue their venture through the forest. Salazar and Godric battle another creature but still can't find the reason for the distress. So after Salazar suggests that it might be a good idea to keep an eye on the nomadic people, they return to camp with them. They are quickly driven from the group when the nomads discover that they have magic after Salazar uses it in front of them. Since their hatred for magic has become clear, Godric suggests that he and Salazar rather return to the village. Episode 5 is parallel to episode 4, showing what Helga and Rowena were up to while Salazar and Godric were in the forest. Helga and Rowena continue to try and find a solution for the creature, and Helga's younger sister tries to help them, but because she is still in her early teens, her magic is still manifesting. So while Rowena is helping Helga's sister with magic, she has to return to the base or the root of magic, and that helps her come upon an option that she hadn't thought of before. They find a way to create a permanent shield around the village that is infused with the charm from earlier, so it would specifically be effective against the creature. The episode ends with Salazar and Godric returning to the village and Rowena and Helga telling them about the solution that they found. The episode starts with a new spell being cast and the village now apparently being out of danger. With Rowena's part of the deal complete, she now is free to join Salazar and Godric's travel party, and the group decide to depart from the village the next day. However, during the night, a strange attack occurs in and around the forest, and alarmed, the four decide to venture into the forest, only to find the nomadic group from earlier dead. Salazar notices that there's a child missing among the dead, and they quickly set out to find said child. During their search, they once again come upon panicked creatures who they have to defend themselves against, and because of that, their search for the child becomes more urgent. The episode ends with them finding the child, only to realize that the child is in fact the cause of the trouble, as the child is an obscurial. The final episode would focus on them trying to contain the damage that the obscurial is doing, as well as trying to calm the child down. Once they do succeed in in this, the Obscurial retreats back into the child's body. They bring the child out of the woods, and Helga pleads with her mother to take the child in and to help the child harness her magic. Her mother agrees, as the only way to get rid of an Obscurial is to nurture the child and the child's magic. As they sit in the aftermath of the situation, Rowena brings forth the idea of the four of them banding together to create a school for magical children, so they could help teach children to harness their magic instead of fearing it, and thus hopefully keep the creation of Obscurials to a minimum. And that would conclude the first season. Now, I know there might be some people who find this plotline cliche, as Fantastic Beasts already did the Obscurial thing, but I do think that the existence of an Obscurial or something equally as bad that can truly show the need for the nurturing of magical children is needed. I think it could be a very powerful motivator for four people from completely different backgrounds to come together to reach a common goal. Now, originally I had planned to literally take you through every single episode of every single season as I saw it, but because I don't know how many people would actually be interested in that, and also because it would make the video infinitely longer, I decided to instead just give you kind of longish summaries of what would happen in season 2 and season 3 instead. So in terms of the timeline of the story, I think season 2 should take place about 2 years after the events of season 1, with the soon-to-be founders going back to Helga's home to discover that the child that they had given to Helga's mother has completely recovered from being an Obscurial. The season's villain, I believe, should be some form of political power, much like the Minister of Magic or the President of Makosa. They would face some kind of opposition for trying to gather a lot of magic users together and bringing them out into the open. The point of controversy being that though Muggles might seem kind of accepting of magic, if they were to see a lot of wizards and witches banding together to form a school, they might grow fearful and paranoid. So the villain's fear is somewhat realized as some of the Muggles become fearful and lash out, injuring Salazar in the process. But the founders persist, and eventually the compromise is reached where they take the spell from the first season and use that to hide Hogwarts from all Muggles. The season ends with the founders finishing the building of Hogwarts. Side note, it's speculated that Salazar might have been the inventor of Parseltongue, so it would have been an interesting side development to see Salazar maybe like inventing or having to magically gain the ability to speak Parseltongue in a life or death situation sometime during season 2. So before I get into season 3, I just want to say that at this point I think it would be relatively reasonable to assume that either Muggleborns were still a relatively new phenomena at this point, or they'd only recently been discovered, as it were, because in some of the lore surrounding the founders, it's mentioned that Godric was a notable Muggleborn supporter and Muggle supporter, and it can only be notable if that action isn't the norm, which means more than likely there was a massive prejudice against Muggleborns at that time. So for me, the events of the third season would take place about 10 years after the events of the second season, with the founders having noticeably aged. I could imagine the season starting with Godric pointing his wand at Salazar, demanding to know what Salazar had done, while a group of school children watch on, and then it flashes back to months or even a year earlier. So the founders are currently faced with how many new people want to join Hogwarts and how much larger the school is growing. So they decide to try and find a criteria for how they select students to teach. And with that, and with the creation of the Sorting Hats, Salazar's prejudice against Muggleborns starts to show more and more. The other founders aren't too worried about it at the start, believing they can talk sense into him, but he keeps on retaliating and pointing out the fact that the Muggles had attacked him so fearfully at the end of the second season. The other founders let it go for now, but the problem continues to rear its head when the first Muggle-born students show up at the school, and Salazar refuses to teach them. Even though he does eventually agree to teach them, the issues between the founders continue to grow. Still, Salazar's aggravation grows, and eventually he decides to build himself a chamber where he can get away from the children and the other founders. But feeling lonely and with painstaking efforts, he eventually decides to breed himself a basilisk to keep him company in the chamber. The problems between the founders worsen, and while Helga and Rowena are away from the school, the problems between Salazar and Godric get so bad that he ends up taking his anger out on one of the Muggle-borns. Enraged, Godric demands to know what Salazar had done, bringing the story back to what we had seen at the beginning of the season. So many theories that I saw talked about a duel between Salazar and Godric, and in this case I do think there should be a duel, because in some ways this all started with Godric and Salazar, and so I do think it would be appropriate if it in some ways also ended with them. After the extreme duel between Salazar and Godric, Rowena and Helga luckily show up back at the school, and they intervene, stopping the duel. Salazar, realizing that he'd done irreparable damage to his friendship with the other three, becomes enraged, and the four heatedly agree that it might be best if Salazar simply left. Salazar gathers his things to go, but in a peak of anger decides to leave his basilisk in his chambers, unknown to the other founders, and swears that his hire would return to bring justice to Hogwarts. He disappears before anything further can be done or said. And yeah, that would be the end of the series. I do think it might be interesting to instead have it end on Rowena reflecting on all that had happened after Salazar had left in the form of a note, and the note ending off with her explaining that she was ill, but that she was too afraid to tell Godric and Helga, and that she is going to be sending someone to look for her daughter so she can at least see her one last time. I do think that this would be a sad note to end it on, but at the same time I still think it would be an appropriate one. But yeah, that is the end of my hypothetical imaginings. I do hope you enjoyed it at least, and I did put a lot of effort into trying to come up with everything and doing the research. So once again, that will be linked in the description box below. But I do want to give a shout out specifically to Harry Potter Folklore. That's an amazing YouTube channel that I got a lot of my information from. He deserves mention. So I just wanted to put that in there as well. I really do hope you enjoyed this video to some extent. If you did, please consider subscribing and liking. I would really appreciate it. And my social media links will be in the description box below. Otherwise, I'll see you guys again next time. Bye!